Data centers have long been the backbone of our digital lives, but now, propelled by the AI boom and the industry's insatiable thirst for computing power, many countries are racing to set up their AI infrastructure. Southeast Asia has seen an influx of new tech investment fueled by the meteoric rise of China's tech and AI industries. So, how is this cash infusion reshaping the region's digital economy? And how are nations navigating this boom amid superpower tech rivalry? I'm Tomasz Koper, and this is Connected on Taiwan Plus. To understand who is investing in Southeast Asian AI infrastructure and what impact it's having on the region, we're joined by Chong Ja Ian, or Ian, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore, speaking to us from Singapore, whose research focuses on US-China competition and its impact on the region. And from California, Tseng, a non-resident fellow at DSET, a Taiwan-based think tank focusing on democracy, society, and emerging technologies. Ian, I want to start with you here and ask you, what is Singapore washing and what impact is it having on the investment landscapes here in the region, especially when it comes to data centers?
So Singapore washing is this concept where firms that might have issues with investing in third countries because of investment screening or purchasing equipment, technologies from third countries because of restrictions, or sometimes wanting to move money around. They use Singapore as a platform because Singapore has a very conducive, open, low-tax environment with banking secrecy that allows this sort of movement of goods, equipment, and in fact, it facilitates this sort of movement. So there's a lot of business opportunity to be had there, but it also means that firms that want to obscure their traces for reasons that others might find suspect, find Singapore to be a convenient space as well. And so what we do see is some tech firms from the PRC setting up shop in Singapore and creating subsidiaries that then get into other markets. One example is TikTok, ByteDance, that's a very well-known one, but others as well, Tencent and all that are here. This gets to data centers. They will also establish data centers here for a whole range of things, including their different services and artificial intelligence. Part of it being that there may be some customers who do not want their data stored inside the PRC. And so Singapore is a convenient stopping point.
Well, Chris, Singapore and Malaysia have a complex relationship. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're less friendly. Now they're deepening their cooperation through the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone, which was launched in 2025, along with a few submarine cable projects. How is that reshaping the region's digital infrastructure ecosystem and Singapore's strategy going forward?
So Malaysia has been using this kind of free trade zones and the special economic zones for its development for a while. And so with the kind of Singapore-Malaysia link in the newer Johor Singapore economic zones, it can have the regional advantage to attract firms to use both the R&D in Singapore, use the manufacturing capacity in Malaysia, and also the infrastructural and land capacity, cheaper than cost. And there is earlier example of China's FDI in Malaysia from cases such as the digital free trade zones or the forest city, showing that this model, the earlier model that capitalized on like long-term returns and the close connection of government-linked enterprises in Malaysia might be unreliable. So instead, Malaysia needs more actual upgrading and technology. Knowledge transfer from this kind of economic cooperation, which is why Singapore matters here.
Well, let's take a look at what is happening on the ground. In the past 5 years, Singapore and Malaysia have become key nodes in the global data center boom. According to DSET analysis, Singapore still leads in data processing capacity, while Johor has overtaken Kuala Lumpur and the Klang Valley as Malaysia's main data hub. DSET also points out that over 58% of existing data center capacity there is linked to Chinese capital, and that's excluding dozens of new projects still under construction. That's a share 8 times higher than in Singapore. So, Chris, your recent study looks at that growing role of Chinese capital and its rising influence in data center industry in Southeast Asia. How does that work? How is Chinese capital participating, and why does it matter?
So in our report, me and my co-author, Ji Chen, we did collect open source informations and manually identify Chinese investment in these data centers. And so we know that China has been stably investing in Malaysia and building more economic cooperation with the country through multiple MOUs. So China's influence can operate in different mechanisms or processes in these different models. So in like Greenfield, where one main firm are in the control of the data centers, although it should be more easier to identify where China's influence is, but in terms of there can be shadow influences from Malaysian firms to build a data center, but in reality it operates under China's influence. So we also look at joint venture models that there are multiple ways that Chinese firms can have their supply chain participations in building and providing hardwares and providing other serving other roles in data centers, and it can lead to other covert kind of transactions. So we see that Malaysia has been buying a lot of the chips has been bought by Malaysia and going to Malaysia, and we do see that in these kind of joint ventures, Malaysian firms are working with U.S. companies like NVIDIA, but also working with Chinese companies like ByteDance or Tencent to build their own data centers, and also like the GDS and others as well. But a lot of the news report has been showing that there are also chips from NVIDIA bought by Tencent building their centers and kind of selling back to China as well. And
I do want to dig into a lot of the things that you laid out here for us. Plenty of good talking points. But before we do that, I want to stay with the graph that we just saw and ask Ian. Well, your research focuses on the externalities of superpower competition, specifically. In light of Chinese policy as well. So from that point of view, how do you interpret these figures? Do they surprise you and are they concerning to you in any way?
No, they don't surprise me. I mean, Malaysia and Singapore are looking for business and they tend not to ask too many questions. So, as long as the business is coming in, nothing illegal in their jurisdictions are happening or nothing illegal is happening in their jurisdictions, they really believe that they have no reason to care. I mean, the big investment in Johor is also no surprise. I mean, the thing with Johor being next to Singapore, you have to realize that a lot of these submarine cable landing points are in Singapore. So to then have the information connect to Johor is far easier than going all the way up at the Klang Valley or to KL. So these patterns are pretty standard. Of course, what could be concerning is if a lot of these investments get Singapore and Malaysia wrapped up in major power competition where you could have pressure coming from Washington or Beijing or both. Right now, the belief is that both Singapore and Putrajaya can make nice with both superpowers, but that may become increasingly difficult should competition become more intense. And what might end up to be the case is that you offend one or both sides at the same time, or working with one, not working with the other, could get one party or the other upset. So there is a lot of money to be made now, but there are risks on the horizon.
Chris, besides foreign capital, there were also local Malaysian players in these projects. Some of these projects that we mentioned, which included both private sector entities and royal land authorities. They had a key role in facilitating access to land and energy. What does that process look like of these entities participating in these infrastructure projects? How are these local players involved?
A lot of the local players in Malaysia are entering the data center industry through mostly through becoming the supplier for land and infrastructure and the constructors, and but they are also seeking ways to upgrade in the industry as well. So, for example, we see YTL. They are the one of the more active players in Malaysian firms to build data centers, but they also have their own AI labs as well to try to develop the Malay language AI models. So we do see that a lot of particularly the ethnic Chinese firms, they have their their ties with Chinese capitalists, and they work with Chinese firms to deliver this kind of mega projects.
Ian, we mentioned Singapore washing at the beginning of the show, but the fact that we're talking about it means that it's not a very well-guarded secret anymore. Does that mean that companies are trying to find new ways to maybe obfuscate the source of their capital if that proves problematic to their operations? Or are companies just kind of giving up on even trying to hide anything?
So I suppose there is a degree of, don't fix it unless it's broken. So companies, unless they get in trouble, I think are continuing to use Singapore as a platform. Of course, there have been several high-profile cases linked to scams, to the movement. The purchase was done through Singapore. The shipment was done through Malaysia of NVIDIA chips that was restricted for sale to the PRC. There have been other cases to do with large-scale money laundering and human trafficking, so on and so forth. Now, the Singapore state has been very eager to make an example every time each of these cases come up to demonstrate that it's taking these things seriously. But the sort of overall business environment has not changed because clearly there's still a lot of temptation to get the money in. So for firms that wish to do regular business, I think Singapore is trying to make itself continue to make itself attractive. But for firms that find a lot of the restrictions and attention to be risky, you see movement elsewhere. Dubai has come up as another name. There are also other tax havens like the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas and so on and so forth.
Chris, your report highlights a few different models which Chinese capital uses to enter these projects. Those include, as you mentioned, greenfield projects, but also joint ventures. So how do these different models work, and are some of them more concerning to analysts than others?
Yes, in our report, we want to target data centers in Malaysia as a way to show that in a complex and mega project like data centers, there are a lot of different suppliers, and their supplier relationships can create the kind of economic security challenges that are not fully addressed in earlier policy discussions. So that's why we talk about joint ventures and also talk about hybrid clouds. So joint venture, as I mentioned before, that a lot of the Malaysian firms enter the industry as land or constructors, and they seek to upgrade from there. And they work with both Chinese but also U.S. firms to get the chips, to get other services as well. And it can become a hub for chip divergence to happen. And we do see a lot of the chips that is being used by in these data centers, and they are also having Chinese suppliers as well. And another thing that we highlight is the hybrid cloud, that is end users directly connect to cloud services. So they do not even have to build their own server like the co-location models. They just connect. So we see news before that Chinese engineers bring hard drives to Malaysia directly and connect to data centers. And so this is kind of one of the examples for hybrid cloud. So it can be a crucial way for computing power leakage as well, computing capacity leakage as well. And it can also create the kind of digital security risk as well. Yeah.
Ian, some countries are getting increasingly cautious about China's involvement in critical technologies and infrastructure, including Taiwan. In fact, President Lai Ching-te has proposed building a democratic supply chain that explicitly excludes China. Are Southeast Asian countries responsive to this kind of rhetoric? Is the alternative presented by Taiwan good enough to convince political and business leaders?
So many in Southeast Asia are far more interested in money than anything else. So they are not particularly interested in the democratic supply chain. Democracy as a form of government is not as institutionalized or entrenched in much of Southeast Asia as it is in Northeast Asia. So I suppose what countries do want is, if there's money from this democratic supply chain, they will want to get at it if it's easy. If it means that they have to air gap somehow the PRC link systems and the democratic supply chain systems, they'll do it if there's money to be made. But of course, if it involves sacrificing business with the PRC to the extent that these cannot be made up by, or more than made up by, investments from democracies, then there's a little of a business case for it. It's about the money.
Well, Chris, speaking of money and other means, Washington has been increasingly using the stick rather than the carrot approach in recent years. We saw tightening export controls, tariffs, all designed to constrain China's technological development and technological rise. What can the region do to make sure that Southeast Asian AI infrastructure isn't used to bypass some of these restrictions that Washington is imposing? And other than mimicking US-style sanctions and export controls, what else can be done by countries in the region?
So in the report, we talk about different policy recommendations that are more targeted to policymakers in Washington, and so the whole report, we center on the risk from the supply relationship, and we argue for more supply chain disclosures. So it can be done through different ways. It can be done through a broader partnership framework between U.S. or Western country with Southeast Asians and other emerging countries as well. We can see that in the recent trade talks between U.S. and Malaysia, there are investment and trade, but there is also some clauses about the kind of U.S. interest as well, that these countries should also be aware of that. So we are arguing that there is more policy can be done about helping these countries to achieve the kind of supply chain disclosure as well. And especially we see that in Malaysia, because in July they have announced that they are also doing export controls on AI, US origin AI chips. So we suspect that Malaysian government are intend to do so, but there are certain capacity limitations for government to enforce these kind of controls. And there's also other more stronger regulation can be done. So in US, there has been talk about chip tagging. There has been talks about tracing the geolocation of the chips, but it has been a more controversial topics, especially in the U.S. politics right now, that not a lot of policymakers they were willing to target certain Chinese firms, but they would not want to damage the whole industry. So it remains more controversial topics, but in our view, that the partnership framework and the kind of working with non-traditional allies in for the U.S. can be one thing to be done.
Well, I'm curious to learn what you think Southeast Asia, the governments and the companies here can do to better navigate this rivalry between China and the United States, basically not get on the US's bad side while also maintaining a trade relationship with the PRC.
So they will probably try to see where the money is. If the stick coming from Washington is going to be painful, or from Beijing for that matter, they may adjust accordingly. But to the extent that they can, they will probably try to tell Beijing and Washington things to mollify them in order for a lot of this transaction to go on. I mean, you have to realize that for a lot of Southeast Asia, there is a misconception that they're dependent on the PRC economically. That's not true. What they are dependent on is this interflow of technology, of goods, of capital between different parts of the world, notably the United States and the PRC, but other places as well, like Europe. So they want to keep this flow going. So to the extent that they can, and provide as few limits and to get around, they'll try. That's what they'll try to do.
Well, I would like to zoom in on the region a little more because while superpowers are concerned with supply chains and technology transfers, what matters to the locals is how they can power the new data centers. We spoke to Evan Ng, a Malaysian senior energy market consultant based in London, and he gives us this summary of the renewable energy outlook in Malaysia and the ASEAN region. Take a listen.
The data center capacity in Malaysia right now is around 1.5 gigawatt, and about 1/3 of it is currently located in Johor. There are currently 11 gigawatt of data center applications in the pipeline, including around half of them being located in Johor, which shows the interest in the region's data center development. In terms of power generation capacity, in Peninsular Malaysia, there are currently around 37 gigawatt of power generation capacity, of which around 10 gigawatt is renewable, with rooftop and utility-scale solar capacity combined contributing to a total of just under 6 gigawatt of capacity. The state-owned utility company, TNB, aims to connect 5 gigawatt of data center by the year 2035 nationally, and this has considered in the power system in place. Our analysis also shows that the government target of 27 gigawatt of solar by the year 2040 set out in the National Energy Transition Roadmap can actually be achieved. Next, there's also an angle around integration of different power systems in the region. For example, through the ASEAN Power Grid Initiative, for power exporting markets like Sarawak in Malaysia, exporting excess renewable energy to countries with a high willingness to pay like Singapore can reduce the curtailment when generation exceed demands in the domestic market. Meanwhile, for importing markets like Singapore, they will be able to achieve their climate goals and meet the customer demand for renewable energy through this low carbon power import.
Power supply is often a huge bottleneck in constructing AI data centers, and Singapore stopped approving new data center projects because of energy concerns. So Chris, do you think it's realistic to expect that Malaysia will be able to power even only the projects that are currently planned without even thinking about what might be added in the future?
Yeah, so there has been various news about power outage in Johor as well. So we can definitely see that this kind of AI data center boom is creating the kind of the bottleneck for energy supply as well. So we also see that in Johor, in Malaysia, there has been policy changes to raise the bar for building data centers as well. But yeah, we definitely think that there can be more policy to be done. But in the short term, a lot of the energy supply might be more dependent on Malaysian domestic firms, because a lot of the cooperation with Chinese companies, the state grid cooperation, or the Asian power grid integration might need more collaboration between countries.
Well, Ian, how optimistic are you about the power supply in the region for all these new data center projects? And do you think that the ASEAN Power Grid Initiative has the potential to change things and maybe open Singapore up again for data center projects?
There is potential. I mean, but Singapore also has land scarcity. And also there's a need of water where for Singapore that would be pressure. Now, I guess the ASEAN Power Grid will come up at some point, but it will take time. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, there is in Singapore talk about getting solar from Australia. That's been on and on again, off again. There's been talk of nuclear power, looking at small modular reactors. However, that is also running into sort of obstacles in terms of what to do with waste.
Now, as we've said, green energy access could be a bottleneck, slowing down data center development. And to tackle the issue, the Malaysian government has launched a new renewable market mechanism. Here's Evan Ng, Senior Energy Market Consultant at Baringa, explaining how it works and what risks and uncertainties it presents to investors. Take a listen.
It's also worth discussing the change in market mechanisms that support the narrative of the government for using increasing data center demand to drive growth in the renewable generation capacity and the whole value chain in Malaysia. To support the surge in power demand from data center, Malaysia have actually launched something called the Corporate Renewable Energy Supply Scheme, or CRESS, in late 2024. This effectively allows large energy users, including data center, to have an avenue to procure a large amount of renewable power directly from a renewable power generator through a physical power purchasing agreement. In terms of the risks and uncertainties for investors, the calculation of system access charges right now remain non-transparent or a bit opaque, and it makes it a bit hard for investors to firm up their investment decisions. The system access charges based on the current rules can be revised by up to 15% for every 3 years, and for data centers and renewable power assets looking into entering a 20 to 25 years power purchasing agreement and a horizon for investment in that length, this could effectively means that in the worst case scenario, the system access charges could be double, and that presents a pretty big uncertainty and risk for investors.
So as we've heard, there are some long-term implications of getting into the data center business, data center industry. Also, there's the question of infrastructure and the time that it takes to build out. Now, with all of this in place, are there concerns, Chris, that the AI bubble, because a lot of people are now calling it a bubble, will eventually lead to a situation where investors pull out or disappear and the local governments are left holding the bag? Are people thinking about these kind of scenarios?
Yeah, it's definitely a very timely discussion about AI bubble right now. Yeah, it's one thing is that it's yet to be seen whether it's a bubble or not. But many firms are claiming that they will need to get the resources to build data centers, to build the kind of AI infrastructures so that they can run faster than their peers. They don't want to lose behind, even though they are not sure about the kind of the return of that. And on the other hand, there's the kind of the demands from technological firms to find resources to do so. So for like Southeast Asia or other places, there are certain bottlenecks, and we also see other places that are becoming like a new locations for data centers in infrastructure as well. As in UAEs or in Mexico's, there are other new locations emerging. So one of the questions about AI bubble is that how useful can these data center projects be used, even if the AI bubble bursts? So it might be, so a lot of people are comparing AI bubble with the dot-com bubble before, but data centers and all the chips and server might be more obsolete if the if the bubble bursts and not be so useful. So there is another concern to be made here.
Well, Ian, given all these long-term implications and the risks that are increasingly presenting themselves, what would be your recommendation to ASEAN political and business leaders in order to maximize the benefits that come with these data centers while avoiding some of the bigger economic risks?
Well, I'd advise them to be more cautious and not to put upfront profits at such a high degree of priority. But I understand for them, and that's not something that they do. They look at quarterly performance, they look at annual performance, and so unfortunately, I think the sort of short-term interest will override the long-term need for caution.